The rain drummed against the hospital windows like 1,000 restless fingers, echoing the anxiety that pulsed through the sterile corridors. Somewhere on the 7th floor, two identical faces lay beneath white sheets, separated by rooms, united by fate. Ethan and Evan Carter, twins so similar that even their mother sometimes hesitated before calling their names. Tonight, their resemblance would become more than a family quirk, it would become a deadly confusion. Ethan had been brought in after a brutal car accident, his body bruised, his consciousness flickering in and out like a broken light. Machines breathed for him, his life dangled on wires and beeps. Just 2 doors away, Evan prepared for open-heart surgery, calm yet terrified, knowing his life depended on the steady hands of a surgeon he barely knew. But in the chaos of emergency admissions, a single mix-up occurred. A nurse, overworked and exhausted, switched their ID bracelets. A simple, almost invisible mistake, yet it set in motion a chain of events that no one could undo. One twin would receive a surgery meant for the other. One would wake up to a body not entirely his own, and the other might never wake up at all. By the time the morning sun sliced through the blinds, Toleds had changed forever. But as the truth unraveled, so did something deeper: hidden letters, family secrets, and a revelation that would make both men question who they truly were and who they were meant to be. The hospital never truly slept, it only paused, exhaled, and waited. The hum of fluorescent lights carried whispers of hope and despair alike. Evan Carter sat in a thin hospital gown, fingers trembling around a cup of lukewarm water. The taste of fear was bitter on his tongue. He kept staring at his reflection in the stainless steel sink, a reflection that looked too calm, too strong. It was Ethan's face, staring back at him from a life they had shared since the womb. Growing up, the twins had always been close, though not in the way most people imagined. Ethan was fire, spontaneous, reckless, living every moment like it might explode. Evan was the quiet one, the thinker, the one who stayed behind to clean the ashes. When Ethan called that night, hours before the crash, Evan didn't pick up. He told himself he'd call back after the surgery. Now that silence haunted him like a curse, down the hall, Ethan lay motionless. His body bore the story of the accident: bruises shaped like seatbelts, a bandage across his temple, dried blood under his nails. Yet beneath the chaos, there was a strange peace on his face, like a man who'd finally stopped running. The nurses moved swiftly between rooms, their minds half asleep, their hands trained for repetition. It took only one distracted moment, one wrong wristband, to change everything. When Dr. Hartley came in with the chart, he didn't hesitate. "Carter, Evan, prepped for surgery," the nurse nodded. She didn't notice that the patient in front of her was unconscious, bandaged, and unresponsive. In her mind, it made sense. Trauma could lead to shock, and shock could silence even the strongest. The operating room swallowed Ethan whole. Meanwhile, Evan was wheeled into a recovery bay meant for his brother. The machines beside him blinked softly, feeding him fluids meant for stabilization, not surgery. He didn't question it. Fear numbed him more than anesthesia ever could. Hours later, the hospital returned to its quiet rhythm. Rain tapped again on the glass. The surgery had been a success, at least, according to the files. "Patient Carter responding well," Dr. Hartley wrote. He didn't know he'd just saved the wrong man's heart. When Evan finally opened his eyes, he felt heavy, as though his body belonged to someone else. His chest burned. He reached up, touching the bandages and tubes. "Why? Why does it hurt?" he whispered. The nurse smiled gently, mistaking confusion for post-op fog. "You're okay, Evan." The surgery went well, but somewhere deep in the ICU, Ethan's body was fading. His organs, already battered by the crash, were fighting a battle they hadn't been prepared for. The fourth dripped steadily, the monitors blinked slower. And in the shadow of that sterile room, their mother, Margaret Carter, arrived. She froze between 2 doors, room 709 and 711, 2 sons. 2 identical names, 2 identical faces, but something inside her, a mother's instinct honed beyond logic, made her hesitate. She stepped into 711 first, brushing her trembling hand over Ethan's face. "My poor Beau," she whispered. Then she heard, from down the hall, another voice calling softly for her. "Mom." Evan's voice cracked, weak but alive. Margaret turned, her heart splitting in two. And that was when the first tear fell, not because one son lived and the other might die, but because in that moment, she wasn't entirely sure which was which. The next morning, the sun tried to push through the blinds, but the light felt wrong, too bright, too honest for a place built on shadows. Margaret hadn't slept. She sat in the corner of room 709, her eyes hollow, watching Ethan breathe. The rhythmic hiss of the ventilator mocked her heartbeat, steady and relentless. She knew what she should do, tell the doctors about the mix-up, but her silence had become its own kind of survival. She had buried truths before. One more secret, she told herself, couldn't hurt. But that was the lie of every secret. It always promises peace, then poisons everything it touches. Ethan stirred, his face pale but alive. "Mom," he whispered, voice cracked from thirst. "Where's Evan?" The question hit her like a blade. "He's resting," she said, forcing her voice to sound steady, but Ethan's eyes narrowed. Even through the fog of medication, something in him sensed the imbalance. "I saw him," he murmured. "In the hallway." He looked scared, said, "They're coming for me." His words slurred, tangled between memory and delirium. Margaret reached for his hand. "You're confused, honey. You were in an accident." Ethan turned his head weakly toward the window, the reflection of her bags flickering like ghosts. "No, Mom. I wasn't the one driving." The silence that followed was louder than the heart monitor. Margaret's pulse quickened. She wanted to deny it, to remind him that witnesses saw his car crash on Route 9, but then she remembered the text message, "We need to talk." About Dad. Ethan's voice had that same tone now, the one her husband used the night he disappeared. Across the hall, Evan's condition worsened. The real patient for heart surgery was now fighting to stay alive without it. Machines beeped erratically. Nurses whispered in corners, their confusion growing. "Didn't Dr. Hartley operate on him yesterday?" one asked. "No," another replied. "That was his brother." The word spread quietly, like a fever of realization. Margaret overheard them and felt her stomach twist. She wanted to scream, to confess everything, but fear anchored her tongue. If the hospital discovered their mistake, they'd cover it up, or worse, blame her for not speaking sooner. She'd seen what silence did to the truth once before. It had cost her husband his life. That afternoon, she slipped into the records room, her heart pounding like a guilty drum. The fluorescent lights hummed above rows of manila folders and sterile computer screens. She typed Carter, Evan into the database. The screen blinked. File logged. Surgical confidential. She tried again under Ethan Carter. The same result. But on the printer tray, left behind by someone careless, was a page with a familiar name. Dr. Raymond Holt, the same surgeon who had operated on her husband a decade ago. Margaret's breath caught. Holt had been dismissed for ethical misconduct, or so the hospital had told her then. Now, here he was again, listed as an advisor on her son's case. The rune spun. The truth wasn't just a clerical error, it was a circle closing in. Whatever had started with her husband's mysterious death had come back, wearing the faces of her sons. And for the first time in years, Margaret Carter felt something she thought she'd lost forever. Fear that the past wasn't finished with her family yet. Dr. Raymond Holt's office sat at the far end of the hospital's administrative wing. Quiet, immaculate, and cold. Margaret paused outside the frosted glass door, her palms slick with sweat. The brass nameplate glinted like a warning. She knocked once. "Come in," a deep voice replied, measured and calm, as if it already knew who stood on the other side. Holt looked older than she remembered. Thinner, his once black hair now gray, but his eyes were the same. Sharp, calculating, and cold as surgical steel. "Mrs. Carter," he said, rising from behind his desk. "It's been a long time," she tried to speak, but her voice wavered. "You operated on my husband 10 years ago. You told me he died of complications." He gestured for her to sit, his smile tight and clinical. "And that was the truth," he said smoothly. "I'm sorry for your loss, but I fail to see how that connects to today." Margaret leaned forward, her hands trembling. "You're advising on my son's case. Why? Why them?" Holt's gaze flickered, just for a second. "Coincidence," he replied, but Margaret knew lies, and she heard them. "No," she said, Voice breaking, my husband's heart was donated after his death. You told me it went to a research program. But I found out it was transplanted into a private patient. You stole his heart, didn't you? The silence that followed was deafening. Then Holt exhaled, the mask slipping. You don't understand, Margaret. Your husband was part of something larger, a study, a breakthrough in genetic cardiac repair. His heart, it wasn't ordinary, it could regenerate. Her stomach dropped. And my sons, she whispered. Holt's expression hardened. Evan inherited his father's heart defect. Ethan didn't. I followed their medical history because their DNA could unlock what your husband started. When I heard Evan needed surgery, I saw an opportunity. I didn't order the mix-up, but I won't deny it served a purpose. Margaret stowed, fury replacing fear. You used my family like test subjects. You played God with my husband. Now with my children. Holt's voice lowered to a chilling whisper. I saved one of them. Be grateful for that. She slapped the desk, her hand shaking. Which one? He didn't answer. That same hour, Ethan woke again, drenched in sweat. Fragments of memory flashed, headlights, a voice shouting, the screech of tires. He saw Evan beside him, gripping the wheel. Slow down, Ethan, but then. No, it wasn't him driving. It was Evan. The crash hadn't been Ethan's fault. They'd switched cars that night after an argument about their father. Ethan gasped, the truth cutting through the morphine haze. His brother had been running from something, or someone. The last thing he remembered before the crash was Evan saying, he knows, Ethan, about Dad, about the experiments. The pieces locked together with terrifying clarity. The crash hadn't been an accident, it had been an attempt to silence the truth. As the storm outside deepened, Margaret left Holt's office trembling, the echo of his words haunting her. Be grateful for that. She hurried down the hall toward her son's rooms, her mind racing with horror and regret. Somewhere between those two rooms, she realized the cruelest part. It wasn't just the hospital that had betrayed her family. It was her own silence that had given them permission to do it. The hospital alarms screamed like sirens from another world. Nurses ran, doctors shouted, and somewhere between room 709 and 711, Margaret Carter felt her heart break into 1,000 pieces. Code blue, someone yelled. She turned just in time to see a team rush into Evan's room. His monitors had flatlined. Evan, she whispered, running after them. Through the glass, she saw his body convulse under the defibrillator's charge. Clear, a jolt of electricity lifted him from the bed. Nothing, again. His body jumped once more. The steady beep returned. Faint, fragile, like the whisper of a heartbeat refusing to give up. Behind her, Ethan appeared in a wheelchair, pale and weak, clutching his chest. Mom, what's happening? His voice cracked like a child's. Margaret turned, her breath catching. Seeing both her sons in the same frame, one barely alive, one fighting to stay awake, was more than her soul could bear. You shouldn't be out of bed, she whispered, guiding him closer. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. I remember now, he said. It wasn't me driving, Evan. He said he had to go see Holt. He found something about Dad. He didn't want me to know. He said it was safer if I stayed behind. His voice trembled. He was trying to protect us. Margaret's throat tightened. Protect us from what? Ethan looked down. From the truth. From Holt. He told me Dad didn't die during surgery. He was killed because he wanted to expose the experiments. Evan was going to bring everything to light. That's why he ran. Margaret staggered back, the sterile floor spinning beneath her. 10 years of lies folded into this moment. Your father didn't die from complications, she whispered. He was silenced, and now, they almost did the same to you. Ethan's hand found hers. Mom, it's not too late. We can save Evan. But when the surgeon emerged from Evan's room, his expression was grave. We're losing him. His heart's failing. He needs a transplant immediately. And there's no match in the system. Margaret stared at him, her body trembling. What if there was? The doctor frowned. You mean? Her gaze shifted to Ethan. Ethan understood before she spoke. No. Mom. Tears streamed down his face. Don't even think it. But Margaret was already sinking under the weight of a mother's impossible choice. She'd lost her husband to Holt's experiments. She wouldn't lose both sons. Maud, if one could live, she turned to Ethan, cupping his face. You were always the strong one, she whispered. The one who could forgive. He shook his head violently. I won't let you trade me. Mom, I won't let you live with that. The doctors waited, frozen between duty and disbelief. The silence was unbearable. Then, softly, Ethan smiled through his tears. If I can give him what Dad gave us, life, then maybe it means all this pain wasn't for nothing. Margaret sobbed, clutching him to her chest. No, baby. No. But Ethan's voice was calm. It's okay, Mom, we're twins. Half of me is already in him anyway. The ICU settled into a quiet lull, the storm outside finally passing. Margaret sat between the two beds, holding Ethan's hand while Evan's chest rose and fell steadily under the rhythm of the ventilator. The hospital no longer felt cold. It felt fragile, like glass, yet full of the kind of love that could survive even the harshest fractures. She thought of Holt, of the lies, of the years stolen by silence, and felt the weight of truth pressing on her chest. But she also felt hope, fragile and stubborn, threading its way through the fear. Ethan's sacrifice had not gone unnoticed. Though he bore scars, both physical and emotional, he smiled faintly, whispering jokes only a twin could understand. Evan's eyes flickered open, recognition and relief flooding his face. They didn't need to speak. Every heartbeat, every grasped hand, every shared breath reminded them of the bond that not even death, deception, or choice could sever. Margaret let herself cry freely. For the first time in years, she realized that while the past could not be changed, the present could be lived fully, with honesty, with courage, and with love that refused to let go. In the sterile hospital room, amid machines and monitors, she found the miracle she had thought lost, the resilience of family, the power of forgiveness, and the unbreakable thread connecting to brothers, one mother, and the truth that finally set them free.